for post-secondary education for the state of Alabama. Previous to that, I was in the legislature and served on the Education Policy Committee, the Education Budget Committee, and prior to that I spent 8 years on the Alabama State School Board. I and my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion on the school board worked very hard to be the accountability body for the state of Alabama. So I personally feel very strongly about that. Now, when No Child Left Behind came along in 2001, it tried to put a one-size-fits-all mentality on school systems around the nation. Once again, in a bipartisan fashion, we realized that didn't work. And so this committee and this Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, decided to move back from that. So the law we passed last year, the Every Student Succeeds Act, is very clear. It's very explicit about getting away from the one-size-fits-all mentality. We have had some testimony recently before this committee, as was referenced earlier, from the Oklahoma State Superintendent of Education, which sort of gives us a good example of what states around the United States are intending to do to make sure that they take their role in accountability very seriously. So far from getting away from accountability, we believe in the law that we actually put accountability where it would have the greatest impact, and that is with state and local education leaders. In some cases, those are state school board members or local school board members. In some cases, it's state superintendents of education, local superintendents of education, people you know very well. And you know very well from your experience that these people are closer to where the schools are, closer to where the students are, and also have a pretty good handle on what needs to be done to make sure that education is getting through to every child, because we want every child to be successful. Now, to protect this state and local authority over their accountability systems, the Every Student Succeeds Act included a number of protections to ensure the law would be implemented correctly. For example, the law asks states to evaluate schools based on consistent underperformance of any subgroup of students, with consistent underperformance being, quote, determined by the state, close quote. The law also prohibits you or any other secretary from regulating what, quote, consistently underperforming, close quote, means. Now, I know you didn't give the quote that we heard earlier from your predecessor about the smart lawyers, but the concern is there may be some smart to get around the explicit words in this statute. We've seen that with other departments of government. So what I want to ask you to do today, in your words, not your predecessor's words, in your words, I want you to assure us that the Department of Education will respect the role of state and local leaders by following the clear restrictions of the Every Student Succeeds Act that it places on the Federal Government when it comes to accountability. And in particular, in your remarks, I want you to tell us what you will do to ensure that states retain the sole right explicitly given them in the statute to determine the meaning of, quote, consistently underperforming, close quote.
Yeah, so for us, I think, again, the careful attention to the input that we get from states and districts will drive our work on regulations and guidance. Joy is a great example. I think Joy shared with the committee, noting that Oklahoma's approach to accountability under the waiver had grouped subgroups together. And she actually thought the Every Student Succeeds Act requirement to look at each individual subgroup would allow her to make an important step forward for equity and excellence in her state.
Mr. Secretary, what I want to hear is, are you going to not let your lawyers get you to do something that evades the law? Will you enforce this law as it is written and given the clear intent of the Congress?
We will certainly ensure that our regulations and guidance are consistent with the letter of the law. We're committed to that. We're also committed to trying to work with states and districts to ensure that their approach is consistent with the letter of the law. And again, I think we have an opportunity.
In that way, you respect that the states have the sole responsibility to determine what this phrase, consistently underperforming, means. Will you be sure that the states have that authority as is explicitly given them in the statute?
We're early in the process on gathering comments.
That's a yes or no question. Will you do that?
Well, Respectfully, I'm not sure that it is, because as states think about this work of implementing Every Student Succeeds Act, we are getting questions from states and from districts and from other stakeholders about how they move forward with some of the definitions in the law, and we will work with states on that. I'm committed to working with this committee, committed to ensuring that our implementation is consistent with the letter of the law, and interested in your feedback, but I don't want to get ahead of the negotiated rulemakers. I don't want to get ahead of the review of comment that we're getting from states and districts.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Secretary,